I had some people request that I show a video on how to mod your X-Wing miniatures to use magnets instead of the plastic peg bases. Right now I have everything out here that I'm going to use for this project. You don't necessarily need to have all this stuff. You really only need probably a few of these things. This is just what I use to make it go a little bit easier for me. Drill, if you don't have a drill, you could use a corded one, but you could always pick one of these up at a hobby store or whatever. I think this cost me like $2 or $3 at a hobby store. It's pretty cheaply made, but it gets the job done. So it's you just put the drill bit there and spin it, and it takes you a little bit longer, but it'll do the job if you need it. I will need to drill into the miniature, which means I'm also going to need to remove this little plastic peg, and to do that I'm going to use these pliers, and you could use whatever you got around to pull those out. I don't know if you could wiggle them loose with your fingers, but you could try that. Some of these, if you wiggle them enough, actually the little plastic peg that's built into the ship will just pop out. This one doesn't. But I've had a few of the miniatures, when I just wiggle them a little bit, they just kind of pop out. So, screwdriver, I'll need this later on. I've got my base, and you might notice the metal washer in here. I've started gluing metal washers onto the bottom of my bases. It just helps stabilize them a little bit, because now they're heavier, so now they're not so top heavy when you play with them, and they don't just fall over. A little bit of sandpaper, 2 different drill bits, and I'll show you why this one has tape on it a little bit. I've got a little empty yogurt container filled with water, and I just use that to cool the screw as I go through the process. It gets pretty hot to the touch since you're grinding on it and causing a lot of friction. The screws that I'm going to use are there's some sheet metal screws, and these ones in particular, I don't know if it'll focus correctly on this or not. No. These are 6 by 3/8 sheet metal screws. They're really small. They're only about that big. I'm going to hold it in comparison to the X-Wing here. They're very small. I like the small ones because I don't have to cut them down. You'll need your spherical magnet, which I've got right here, an X-Acto knife. You don't necessarily need that, but it makes the job of cutting the little tip off the plastic peg a little bit easier. I've got my Dremel. I've got a round spherical grinding bit here, and then I've also got my sanding spindle here. I would recommend using a variable speed Dremel, but if you don't have one, any regular Dremel will work just fine. And one of the most important pieces of equipment then are the safety glasses. Anytime I am working around any tools that have spinning parts or moving parts with motors, I always use safety glasses because I like my eyes and I would like to keep them. So, that being said, let's get started. The first part of this process that I'm going to work with is the actual peg that goes into the ship right here. I'm going to need to take that little sprue that sticks off. It's kind of a semicircular piece, and I'm going to chop that off now. Like I said, you could use pliers or whatever. I'm going to use my X-Acto knife and just pop it off. That probably would be good enough right there to use. It's a flat area though, so the problem is once I set it on there to glue, the magnet tends to just kind of roll off, and it's kind of a difficult job balancing it in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my Dremel, and I'm going to make just a little bit of a concave surface to that. I'm going to set that in there and just kind of show you what I mean. If I set the circular piece, it just kind of falls, just rolls right off. So I'm going to take my Dremel, let's take the peg out again, and you don't really need to take much off. I'm just going to kind of barely tap it. Okay. That should do it. So if I set that on there, it balances real nice. And I'm going to grab my super glue out of my lovely peanut butter jar with rice. I use the rice as a desiccant. It helps keep the super glue from drying out. I'm just going to put a tiny, tiny dab of glue on there. And just let that sit. And that should be good there. I'm going to set that aside because by the time I'm done with the actual peg replacement in the ship, this should be dry and ready to use. So I'm going to set that off to the side. The next step here is I'm going to remove the peg from the bottom of the ship, and I'm just going to take my pliers and I'm going to try to wiggle it a little bit and see if it pops out. And more than likely it won't. This one's in there really good, so I'm just going to bend it back and forth a little bit and then it pops out. Don't need this peg anymore, so that goes away. What's left there, that white dot, that's the broken plastic. The actual way that goes in the ship is a little semicircular hole, which would actually mean they didn't necessarily need those little plastic pegs that go into the bottom of the ship. Your original pegs would have just slid right into the ship, so I'm not quite sure why they added those on. Maybe just one extra buffer in case they broke or something, but we do need to get rid of that little plastic. So I'm going to use this 1/16 of an inch drill bit. Once again, you could use this little hand screw and I could sit there and drill it by hand, but I'm going to use my battery powered drill instead. Whenever you drill anything on these ships, you got to be really careful because obviously they're very delicate, but the torque on those power drills can sometimes move it in your hand, can sometimes twist it, and I don't want it to twist it out of my fingers and then break off all these pieces here. So you really got to hold it somewhere where you can hold it very firmly without worrying about snapping any of the pieces or anything. I recommend not putting it in a vise or pressing it down on the table or anything, just because the ships are so delicate. But I'm going to hold it in my hand, and I'm just going to, I've got it on my drill on a slow setting, but I'm going to drill it as slow and steady as possible. There's no rush here. And you want to be as straight as possible too. If you get off at a weird angle, that's going to screw you up later on. And if you're not sure if you're straight, kind of turn your ship as you go. Okay, with this drill bit, I'm not really trying to remove a lot of material. All I'm trying to do is really get a hole started so that I can use the bigger drill bit. If I start with the big drill bit, the drill bit tends to kind of wander around, and then it's harder to get a hole centered. The reason why I've got the blue tape on here is a trick I learned as a woodworker. You can use the tape, it doesn't matter, any masking tape, any type of tape, honestly, anything that's sticky will work on here. Use it as a depth gauge, so figure out exactly how far into the object you need to go and then put tape on there. Now this tape is left over from another model I did, and you see I definitely don't want to go that deep, because if I would drill right up into R2 there. So I'm going to pull this tape off. It's actually pretty easy to remove. And I'm going to grab some more tape. Yeah, definitely check your models before you start drilling. That could be a sad day for you, especially like this one where I spent hours repainting it. Okay, so I think I'm only going to go about that deep into the X-wing. I'm going to use my fingernail as kind of a guide, so right about there, I think. So that's about as far as I'm going to go, which is pretty shallow. Okay, and measure twice, cut once. I want to make sure that that's as far as I want to go. Okay, good. Let's mount this bit. And I'm now going to use this bigger one. This one is a 7/64. And I'm going to find the hole that my 1/16 of an inch bit made. And this one I'm also going to go very slow. And I want to also make sure that I'm going nice and straight. Clear some of that extra out of there. Okay. And usually produces a pretty clean cut hole there. If you do get any edges or anything like that, I just use an X-Acto knife and clear it out, but I've almost every time gotten a very clean cut hole out of that. That is the hole where the screw is going to go, but the screw is not ready to go in there just yet. If I tried to put the magnet into the screw, I grab a spare magnet I had. If I try to put the magnet in there right now, you see it's not sitting exactly centered, and I can move it around, but it tends to easily shift off to one of the sides and roll around like this, and that's not ideal. I don't want my ships flopping around the place. So what I'm going to need to do is take my Dremel to this screw, and I'm going to put a concave surface in there, and this I need to use a vise for, because if I try to do this by hand, it's probably gonna, the Dremel's probably gonna kick the piece out of my finger, and then I'm gonna Dremel into my finger. So I'm gonna use a vise for this next part. The next portion here, I'm gonna be putting a concave surface into the screw so that my magnet sits in there much nicer. Watch your speed on this if you have a variable speed one. If you go too fast or too slow, it's going to kind of dance around on you. I'm going to use 10,000 RPM here. It just seems to work pretty decently for what I'm doing in this case. So make sure my bit is in there nice and tight, and here we go. Okay. Let's check to see if that is a good enough surface to work with. My guess is it probably is, but I always want to check before I take it out of the vise. Before I actually put the magnet down, because if I put the if I put the magnet on there right now, it's going to pick up all the little metal filings. So what I'm going to do is I just wrapped my magnet, little magnetic sphere, up in a paper towel, and I'm just going to kind of hover it over the surface and tap around on some stuff here. And what I'm trying to do is pick up all the shavings on the outside, so when I unwrap the sphere, I've got all the metal shavings on the towel. I want to try to keep the metal shavings off the towel or off the magnet as much as possible. I don't like having the magnet coated with that. So that actually sits in there fairly well. It does move around a little bit, but that's probably going to work pretty decently for what I want with the ship. And I could just let it go at that, but I don't like this edge on here, so I'm actually going to raise the screw up a little bit, and I'm going to switch to this head on, that head on my Dremel, and I'm going to grind down the sides a little bit to give me a nice clean edge. So I raised the screw up a little bit. Now these sides are a little bit more exposed. I didn't do that in the first place because sometimes when I'm grinding this down with the Dremel, it tends to tilt on me a little bit. So I put it down as far as possible for that portion, and for this I raise it up a little bit. And I'm just going to use 10,000 RPM again, and I'm going to go around and around and around until I've ground that outside surface down. Okay, that's about where I want it. I see that that head is shrunk down quite a bit. The piece is going to be really hot at this point, so you know I can tap it just a little bit, but that is really hot. If I held my finger on there for a few seconds, I'd probably burn it. So this is where I'm going to get my water, and I'm going to place my screw. Just dip it in there real quick. Okay. Should be good to go now. And it's really hard to see on the camera, but there's a little bit of some burrs, a little edge there, and I don't want those on there when I put it on my magnet because it's going to scratch up the magnet. So I'm going to take a little bit of sandpaper and move that back and forth just a little bit to remove those burrs, and should be nice and flat now. I could, spin this around a little bit if I wanted to make sure I get everything, but the main thing is I want to get the burrs off that front surface there. Okay, my screw, I think, is ready to go. So let's go attach it to the ship. So I am ready to go at this point. My magnetic sphere is about as dry as it's going to get on here, and the super glue is pretty solid on there at this point. That dries really fast on that. So what I'm going to do now is take my screw, and I'm going to hand position it, and I do this by hand here because it's really easy to get it off kilter, and then it ends up just kind of looking weird. So I'm going to get that as straight as possible before I really start tightening it. That looks pretty good. So then I'm going to take my screwdriver and I'm going to screw that in. Now, when you choose a screw and a drill bit, when you're making a pilot hole for the screw, make sure you don't use a drill bit that's too small, because the screw is essentially a wedge, and when it goes in there, it's going to push the surface apart. That the friction helps keep it in there. So if you use a pilot hole that's too small, you're going to end up cracking your model in half, and it's just going to pop. I haven't done that on these before, but I've done it with wood many times. So choose a drill bit that is essentially about the same size as the shaft of the screw, but leave a little bit of gripping room there for the threads. So this is on there really good. I might be able to go a little bit further, but once it really starts tightening up, I don't really want to go too much further. So that's on there real good. It looks real nice. So I'm going to test it out. It sits on there very well. I can tilt my ship in any direction. It's on there nice and tight. The base moves around, but it's not coming off. When I take these off, I typically like to hold on to the sphere when I take them off there. You don't have to do that. The glue should hold, but I just don't want to have to re-glue it again. So just in case, I always hold it by hand when I remove it. And honestly, when I store these, I don't store all these stems by themselves, like in a big group. You're probably just asking for having a giant mess of magnets and plastic in there, and the clacking around might end up loosening them. So what I do is with my ships, I just leave them like this and do that and store them. And when you're ready to go, put your second stem on, or not, just use the one, I don't care, and you're good to go like that. So I hope this was informative and maybe give you some ideas to help mod your own ships.